Good morning, fellow humanists. My name is Todd Kimball. It's an honor to be your MC this morning. Look at all these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed faces that I see. Despite the one less hour sleep, you guys are looking fantastic. And we've got a wonderful presentation today, a two-panel presentation. Had the chance to meet our presenters this morning. Incredibly talented and engaging people. You're really going to enjoy the presentation this morning. A reminder that humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. It advocates the extension of participatory democracy and the expansion of an open society standing for human rights and social justice. Our reader today is Joyce Lackey. Joyce.
All right. The reading this morning is the editorial from the February 17th The Week magazine. Both at home and abroad, the market for intolerance and illiberalism is as strong as ever. In Florida, there will be no AP African American Studies, lest high school students' unformed minds be exposed to the curse of critical race theory. But on the other hand, make sure not to buy the new Harry Potter video game, Hogwarts Legacy, lest you seem to be endorsing J.K. Rowling's ostensibly retrograde views on gender. Do buy Salman Rushdie's new novel, Victory City. It's a great book, and the least you can do considering how many assassination attempts he's survived since offending the wrong mullah. But wait. Don't forget about the young people, both Muslims and Hindus, slaughtered and imprisoned by Hindu fundamentalists because they fell in love with someone of another faith. The propagandist's purpose, said Aldous Huxley, is to make one set of people forget that certain other sets of people are human. This very concise insight goes a long way toward explaining why the news is perennially filled with so many disturbing stories of intolerance, hatred, and suppression. There are, of course, differences in degree. Boycotting a book is not the same as killing a writer. Banning a class is not the same as murdering a newlywed couple. But whatever the precise stakes, the game is always played the same way. The propagandist always claims, they are trying to erase us, so we must nullify them first. And the goal is always maximum publicity. You need to shut down only one writer or kill one couple to discourage 1,000 others. Jacques Ellul, in his classic study of propaganda, underlines that the propagandist is never a true believer. Manipulation is the point. There is no perfect inoculation against this. But whenever anyone asks you to ban something or hate someone, it's always worth asking, what's in it for them?
Thank you, Joyce, for a very timely and thoughtful reading. A little bit different introduction of our program today, and I'll explain. First, I'm going to read a little bit about the organization that our presenters are from this morning. Then I will read the introduction of both presenters and turn it over to our first presenter, Meet Panchal. But first, Beyond Toxics is a statewide environmental justice organization in Oregon. This morning's two-person panel will cover one of the bills Beyond Toxics is supporting in the 2023 legislative session. The bill is known as Oregon's Medical Waste Incineration Act, SB 488. Beyond Toxics' position on the bill is that it will reduce waste incineration emissions by establishing lower limits for a large amount of medical waste incineration. The result will be improved air quality for communities around waste incinerators now and into the future. The presentation will also cover the other air quality projects Beyond Toxics is working on with communities throughout Oregon. And now we move to the introduction of our two presenters. Originally from Mumbai, India, Meet Panchal holds a graduate degree from the Tata Institute of Social Services in social work with a specialization in livelihoods and social entrepreneurship. He discovered his passion to work with marginalized communities who were vulnerable to climate and environmental change. Meet's academic fieldwork focused on livelihood assessments and economic and environmental justice with an emphasis on water equality projects. Paige Hopkins grew up in southeastern Washington. She went on to complete her Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies at Portland State University. During her time in school, she interned with the Portland Fruit Tree Project to develop a mutual aid program for urban fruit tree produce within the Portland community. This experience influenced her interest and passion for grassroots-led initiatives applied to environmental and criminal justice issues. Let's introduce our first, let's have a warm welcome from our friendly house crowd and a warm yet muted welcome from our Zoom audience for Meet Panchal.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having us today, and appreciate Todd for those introductions. Really appreciate that. As Todd gave a brief introduction of Beyond Toxics, I'm going to go slightly a bit in depth on the history of Beyond Toxics. And as you can see, we follow this flower model, which kind of touches upon different issues and different ways of how we do our work, such as law policy and reform, outreach, education, and also grassroots organizing as being one of the major focuses. But like Todd said, Beyond Toxics is a statewide environmental justice organization which started back in early 2000. And we have two offices, which is in Lane County and Jackson County. In Lane County, it's in Eugene, Oregon. And our work actually started with grassroots work with the rural communities in forestry and pesticides. And over time, we kind of expanded that work to include environmental justice, climate justice, and air quality, as you can see. But we work mostly at the grassroots level with the community because we want to work with them to uplift that voice and bring that to the state, to the larger state policy level. So I'm going to start off with one of the major bills, or one of the biggest priorities which we have this year is SB 488, also known as the Oregon's 2023 Medical Waste Incineration Act. It's the chief co-sponsors for this bill is Senator Patterson and also Senator Manning, and also Representative Neuron. And we also have the co-bill sponsors as Senator Compos, Senator Taylor, and Senator Golden. And just to give, again, a bit more brief context of what exactly waste incineration is, mostly, so the question kind of arises from what happens when you incinerate things or when you incinerate stuff. So when you heat up those waste materials to burn or you gasify them, it kind of carries out a chemical reaction which can produce a large amount of emissions that are significantly toxic and can cause cancer. And in addition, the process of incineration, the byproduct which is created from that, it's usually called leachate, and the concentration of that is a lot toxic when it's in its liquid form. So waste incineration makes it looks like they are getting rid of waste materials from the far end, but as and when we start feeding materials into waste incineration and it starts to burn, incineration also renders those materials to be even more toxic. So as the system kind of converts that waste to energy, we actually see that waste incineration is actually highly inefficient and it's even costly. And the problem is the energy which is derived from the waste that is like from fossil fuels in the origin, such as plastics, which usually are found in the waste stream. Um, it's just another way of like burning fossil fuels, and also dumping like the large amounts of carbon dioxide into the air, and again the large amounts of highly toxic byproducts which is created when you incinerate things, and that's put into the atmosphere. So when I'm talking about waste incineration, we are focusing more on Covanta Meridian, which is Oregon's only waste incinerator. And we are actually more aware that trash incineration is the most expensive way of polluting, and also to manage waste to make energy. Uh, and that waste doesn't actually magically disappear when it's burned. Uh, and that threatens the climate and public health aspect with air pollution, and the toxic ash that makes even actually landfills more dangerous when unburned waste from are basically like got from landfills directly. So incinerating that unburned waste causes more pollution when you compare it to burning coal. And in case of it's actually even more harmful to health and the environment than directly just using landfills. So on the right, you can see that Covanta is actually the largest owner of an operator of in United States to from waste to energy incineration assets. I think it employs approximately 32 people in Oregon. And also, Covanta actually imports a majority of its medical waste from other states and counties at the same time. So, although their reports actually don't specify how much amount do they exactly get, uh, but it only focuses more on Marion County and the rest of Oregon. We've actually heard that in-state waste is actually probably within the vicinity is around 10% of all its medical waste burnt. So approximately 90% of it could be imported from out of state. And Oregon is home to the Covanta and the nationals, one of the nation's few municipal waste incinerators, which is actually allowed to burn untreated medical waste. So the problem kind of lies with Covanta in as again one of the nation's few municipal waste incinerator which is allowed to burn medical waste. So just to take a step back and talk about what is exactly medical waste. So medical waste is a subset of waste which is generated at usually at healthcare facilities such as hospitals or at physicians' offices or dental practices, blood banks, or even veterinary hospitals or clinics, and as well as even medical research facilities and labs. So generally, anything medical waste which is referred to as is also referred to as regulated medical waste according to EPA. And Covanta accepts that medical waste from Marion County and other parts of Oregon. And in addition to that, it also burns thousands of tons of imported medical waste while taking advantage of Oregon's weaker municipal trash incinerator regulations. So while all this waste incineration is polluting, when we just focus on the medical waste aspect, it's highly toxic, which is why it is a regulated waste stream from EPA. So it pollutes the soil. We know that it also pollutes the rivers. It pollutes the air and also has heavy metals, heavy toxic chemicals, uh, which can harm with both human health and wildlife. So this actually makes Oregon a dumping ground for toxic pollution that other states don't want. And Oregon is home to one of nation's few municipal incinerators, again, which is allowed to burn untreated medical waste. Uh, from the environmental protection aspect, particularly when we are focusing on reducing high mercury levels in the Willamette Valley or the Willamette River, this will benefit actually from a stronger waste incineration regulation. And We hope that rural communities in the mid-Willamette Valley, who are actually being exposed to these heavy metals, and again, dozens of hazardous air toxins from the Covanta incinerator, we hope that it also helps regulate that air quality and bring a much lower air quality index to the neighborhoods who reside around Covanta. So, in a nutshell, I just want to focus more on how much, like, the slide kind of just shows on how much medical waste is burnt. From 2019, it was 11, or close to 12,000 tons. And in 2021, last which was reported by DEQ, which is the Department of Environmental Quality, it burnt around 14,168 tons. So, what air toxics are usually released when actually you're burning this medical waste? Again, I just want to go do a brief overview of this. It does around the PM10, which is particulate matter of 10 particles. It has around 16 tons a year. We can see that NOx is particularly higher, which is 337 tons a year. And uh, if you focus on the yellow GHG, also known as greenhouse gases, the equivalent of burning, which is the allowable limit, is 214,000 versus how much it burns is fairly similar. And this slide also again just focuses more on the health impacts, which actually affects down in communities like heavy metals such as chromium or cobalt or even copper. They have just harmful effects on, and they're known to be cancer causing at the same time. So, similarly to dioxins, if you see, uh, dioxins can cause cancer, lymphoma, or even leukemia, and known to be really carcinogenic. And also affects usually the reproductive systems, and they can also basically defunction. And the other kinds of volatile organic compounds, which does come from Covanta when it's burning, uh, those volatile organic compounds, also known as VOCs, uh, they tend to affect, because your eye to be irritate, you can get headaches, you can get dizziness, can also feel really, you can get nausea or get fatigued really easily. And all of those effects are usually felt by the communities who live around Covanta. I won't go much into detail with this, but just focusing on the health effects, and people living near incinerators have an increased risk of, again, all types of cancer, including stomach cancer, liver cancer, a bladder, lung, uh, you name it, leukemia. At the same time, respiratory diseases and most other symptoms like asthma even are higher when the air quality is not that great and the air is filled with toxics. So all of this kind of stems down to also like focusing a bit on climate pollution at the same time, how Covanta is also affecting the overall greenhouse gases in terms of emissions. Uh, for approximately every ton of waste which Covanta burns, they emit at least 1 ton of greenhouse gas emissions. So if Covanta is burning a total of 176,000 tons each year of waste, they are basically emitting approximately 162,000 tons of greenhouse gases in a year, which is almost nearly one-to-one relationship. And that is hardly called a sustainable practice. So these greenhouse gas emissions are basically immediately released into the atmosphere. And unlike greenhouse gas emissions from landfills, because also methane gas can be captured from landfills at the same time, uh, Oregon has actually the nation's strongest methane capture requirements of any state. So I just want to sum up with the overview of SB 488, also known as the Medical Waste Incineration Act. Uh, we hope that this this bill actually closes the regulatory loophole in Oregon's air quality laws. Um, and if passed, SB 488 will give the Department of Air Quality the authority to accurately assess how many tons of medical waste is burned annually at a trash incinerator. And if the specified weight limits, if they're exceeded, apply actually even stricter emission limit required by the medical waste incinerators under the federal law. So SB 488 again will appropriately regulate a large polluter and ensure better environmental protection and public health outcomes for all Oregonians. So, which again improve air quality by setting actually stronger air emission limit, and will guide the waste incineration policies to the for now and even into the future. So, thank you.
We're gonna turn things over to Paige now?
Yeah, thank you. Me, if you could go over to the next slide, please. Today I'm going to be switching over to talking about some of our more local air quality work that we're doing here in West Eugene. So a lot of our work in in Eugene in general has focused specifically within West Eugene. And with that, in West Eugene, there's, just for some background information for folks who are not familiar, there's a larger amount of industry within this area surrounding residential communities. So with this map on the right here, it's showing through the City of Eugene Toxics Right to Know program, the amount of toxic substances that are emitted into the year within Eugene. And this data is specifically kept and acknowledged within Eugene through this program that the city has. And so if you look on this map, you can see by area code where there is a lot of pollution and toxic substances emitted. And if you look here out in West Eugene, where this on the left, the red bar graph is, you can see that there is a higher amount specifically within West Eugene. So within West Eugene, you can see a higher amount of health and economic indicators for this community. Within Eugene itself, there is a larger percentage of where low-income folks live, as well as our communities of color live within Eugene. And so the red areas show from the EPA's Climate Justice and Equity Screening Tool that the Bethel and Trainsong neighborhood are in the top 10% of asthma rates in the nation, but also top 10% for low-income communities. And this is nationwide, not statewide. And then this is also a map just looking more at the health and economic indicators in West Eugene. You can see that in the Trainsong neighborhood, this has the third lowest life expectancy in Oregon at 70.2 years versus another neighborhood in the south of UO, which has the third highest life expectancy in the state at 87.9 years. So you can see that this community has faced years of just health impacts from the industrial pollution that's out there. And so we have worked with this community to try to make sure that their voices are heard. And one of the things that we're going to be working on is the public health overlay zone, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. But this just gives a snapshot of why something like this is needed, because this community has been harmed through their health by industrial pollution. So the public health overlay zone the public health overlay zone is a land use law. It was first modeled after the Clear Lake overlay zone, which is, it was first adopted in 2017, and it's applied to our industrial areas within Eugene. What the Clear Lake overlay zone does, it bans worst land uses, and it also requires manufacturing to be done indoors in areas that are really close to homes, parks, and schools. It would also have an increased standard for any odor, noise, or vibrations that are there. And some of these worst land uses that you would see banned are things such as wood preservation, chrome and nickel plating, rubber and plastics production manufacturing, chemical products manufacturing, as well as garbage dumps. And then it would be required to have these done indoors, thinking about how these industries are harming our communities that live within this area right next door to it. So looking at where this public health overlay zone would apply, if you look at the map on the right, you can see the kind of more teal area. This is area around West Eugene and where the pre-existing Clear Lake overlay zone is. But it would extend the rules to apply to this area. And it would apply to industrial areas within the city as well. And first, we want to state that it would apply to new buildings or the expansion of existing buildings, but existing buildings would be grandfathered in at first. So more specifically, a map of where we look at where the public health overlay zone would apply within Eugene. So this is where most of our industry is in this beige color on the map on the right is where all of our industry is within this area. And you can see that homes are right above it. And this is our land use laws allow right here, residential and industrial to be next to each other. So what this would do, it would apply to new buildings or the expansion of any pre-existing buildings. But it would also look at expanding the Clear Lake overlay zone rules and including that would strengthen these banned use lists to include additional manufacturing uses that would impact public health, such as waste incineration or explosives, as well as we would look at vibration or odors and noise standards that would actually be increased, looking at any emission of smoke, dust, particulates, or fumes, or any offensive odors that would be visible to human senses, or any continuous or reoccurring noises and vibrations that would potentially impact the quality of life for people who live within this community. And just for context of what is happening right now in this community, over a long period of time or for many years, people would complain about this foul smell that would be in the air from a specific industry that's out there. It was this polluter known as J.H. Baxter. They eventually closed back in 2022. But after we worked with community and talked to them, a lot of people discussed how that the smell was so bad that they couldn't keep their windows open. They couldn't be outside for too long. People said that they got headaches and overall just impacted their quality of life. So it's just a more concrete example of why something like this is needed. Also, there would be a community meeting requirement. And what this would do is that before the permit application is submitted, the developer would have to host a meeting with the surrounding community members who would be impacted. And this would give them the chance to review the proposal that the developer submitted, as well as identify any issues regarding this proposal. And then the last piece of this is an LRAPA pre-clearance letter. And what LRAPA is the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency that regulates our air quality within Lane County. So if someone was to apply for a development permit or a land use under the guidelines of the public health overlay zone, they would actually have to get a letter from LRAPA that states the operations meet the air quality standards with appropriate measures in place. And another piece of this is the Clear Lake overlay zone discusses making sure that indoor manufacturing has to be indoors, but actually looking and expanding this, you would have to expand these. We would want to expand these buffer zones to be at a 1/4 mile from sensitive uses. And so on the map on the right shows where indoor manufacturing requirement would apply in terms of residential and industrial areas. And you can see the buffer in between. And this could also be strengthened by the buffer zones indoor manufacturing rule by including a requirement that manufacturing facilities requiring no external air toxic emissions would require an air quality permit. And this is the same standard that's used when we look at commercial zones as well in Eugene. So this map on the right, you can see that there's some recent development being slated right next to industrial areas. So how can we think about rezoning our areas with undeveloped land with incompatible zoning? So when we think about creating rules for the future, it's important us to consider what land use looks like. Cities are always forever or always expanding, always building. So we have to consider what this will look like within the West Eugene community. So for the map on the left first, you can see if there was no changes for residential next to industrial, it would continue to look like the base section is industrial, it would have residential right next to each other if we continue to expand. But if we look at the map on the right, you can see that there's a peach color, which is commercial, and then like a lighter blue next to, or that represents residential. And what this commercial would do is slate commercial between industrial and residential. So you don't have those really polluting or toxic air emitters right next to residential that could impact people's health. And so what we're trying to do is, what do we do in the future when the urban growth boundary expands, or there are requests from landowners to rezone? How do we stop industrial land use right next to residential? And it's important that we start thinking about these things now. We need to make sure that the city creates rules for the future to halt the same land use mistakes that we have already made in the past from happening again. We don't want to continue to see our communities harmed by these industrial polluters and toxic emitters. We don't want to see these communities who are already impacted in other ways, whether that's socio or economic factors. We want to make sure that we help these communities however we can so that they don't continue to face health impacts or things such as cancer and asthma at higher rates than the rest of the city and Eugene. And then, so within closing, just on the public health overlay zone, we have some community recommendations that we've heard from the community. Immediately, we want to see this public health overlay zone created to protect public health from covering industrial areas in Eugene. And this could really be a model that could be used for other cities too, to think about public health and land use. And in the future, we want to think about those rules to prevent zoning industrial areas right next to residential, to not make the same mistakes that we have in the past with our land use laws. And then any potential additional steps that we could take as well. The city is looking at creating an insurance requirement for any new and existing industrial facilities to cover any potential cleanup costs. And this is known as a fossil fuel risk bond. And so, for example, there was an industrial polluter known as J.H. Baxter that had closed down about a year ago. And so at the same time, though, they were able to just walk away because they potentially may file bankruptcy. And then it's up to the individuals and the taxpayers to actually pay for this cleanup, or the Department of Environmental Quality. And so it could be the same community paying for the cleanup that someone else did to harm them, which just seems really wrong in of itself. So it would be great to see these fossil fuel risk bonds in place to actually require the emitters and the polluters to clean up their own mess. And so with that, that's just an example of some of our work that we're doing at the local city level to work on policy that overall helps public health and the air quality with communities in Eugene who continue to be further harmed. And so with that, I'll pass it off to Meet to talk about some of our other work we're doing locally.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. I think we have a bit more time to kind of go over this, but it won't take much. The next thing which I'm going to be talking about is called gas station moratorium. Also, just to talk about the policy overview, this policy would kind of focus more on why do we not need more gas stations? As you'll see in the upcoming slides that we already have plenty of them, and we don't need more. And the statistics kind of pushes towards like gas stations are going to become more obsolete in the future. So to give a brief context, again, we already, and at least in Eugene, we've reached at a gas station saturation in terms of if we already have so many gas stations. If you look from this map, we have 40 of them already, and new constructions, new. I think one, two, three, four, five. Five of them are already being constructed. So, but to kind of talk about, everyone has uh, access to gas stations within 5 minute distance. So if you drive 5 minutes anywhere, you're pretty much in a spitting distance of having a gas station. And construction of these gas stations, you can see in some cases are actually just right across each other. But gas stations are hopefully will become redundant in two ways, because actually electric cars are actually gaining popularity in the coming years, and gas stations will become slowly obsolete because 80% of the gas stations are on track to be unprofitable by 2035. So allowing new gas stations to be built is simply a bad investment for the city of Eugene and even for the county. And when we talk about even gas stations do have its fair share of emissions as well. Um, and in this diagram, we talk about how gas stations usually have a lot of ways in which the vapors, gas vapors particularly, get emitted into the atmosphere. And the most common ways are where the fuel vapor is actually released are through gas storage tanks, the underground storage tank at the bottom of the screen. Uh, and other most common ways are also through when gas vapors leak is through when we are dispensing gas from the nozzle, or if the nozzle is leaky, uh, or even if there's a spillage, which quite often happens with gas when you're refueling. And we actually found a study in 2019 which found that gas stations emit uh, benzene from the underground storage tanks, and they were sufficiently high enough to constitute a health concern up to a distance of 500 feet. So if you lived within a gas station, that gas station is right across your house or within 500 feet of it, uh, it would sufficiently be high enough to constitute a health concern. And general population is usually exposed to benzene through inhalation, or even through other sources such as motor vehicle emissions, usually, or even just gasoline evaporative losses at service stations. So this slide kind of talks about how public health is affected by benzene. We see that at least from this map, the benzene levels are increased are found at least 500 feet from gas stations. Uh, Also, heightened benzene levels have been associated with childhood leukemia, and also individual studies have shown that living in areas with higher ambient benzene levels could also have a higher risk of developing cancer. So in this slide, uh, I'm focusing more on the West Eugene area, which Paige spoke about. West Eugene it's actually in the Bethel area of West Eugene. You can see that everyone's market has a 500-foot buffer, which shows yellow, and the houses are represented as black dots. And Basically, within the 500-foot buffer, that's the amount of benzene which can be found or being emitted around those houses. So houses which are within that circle radius are significantly higher at this exposure. And another example at the bottom of the screen, we have two gas stations right across each other, uh, which actually doubles the risk of being exposed to just higher amounts of benzene, which is again known to be emitted from underground storage tanks of gas stations. So with when we abandon gas stations, there's also a higher cleanup cost, which is associated with it. And communities are usually left at the brink of doing this cleanup cost, while the owners just tend to walk away from the site. So here are the two examples which we have, which is on the left, which is Texaco Beaverton, uh, which in 1971 had a lot of as you can see at the bottom of the lining, the water is contaminated, the groundwater is contaminated because uh, the lining was faulty and uh, gas vapors or gasoline mixed with groundwater, which contaminated the neighborhood sites, and residential buildings and other properties just within the area. And the cost to clean that up or to even repurpose it to something else. Actually, currently they are now a coffee roaster known as Ava Roasteria, and just that the significant cost which the community had to go through, cost according to EPA, was just ranged from a few $1,000s to a few $1 million. And another similar example of the a Franco service station is on the right, which is actually in Eugene. It was bought by the Lane Community. It's actually next to the Lane Community College. Was bought by Lane County through a tax foreclosure. Again, they found on site large amounts of just gas plumes being contaminated, which contaminated the soil, higher cleanup costs for excavation, doing well monitoring, which significantly increases the cost for the surrounding communities. And to make it another sequential biofuel, which is currently the gas station, it again costed them close to $900,000 to $1 million. In this slide, just focusing on the city of Eugene's fossil fuel reduction goal and from the transportation fuels. We're hoping to reduce our goals or reduce our fossil fuel reduction by 2035 at least, which is the orange line as you can see, and the blue line is what we are currently on. We did dip quite a lot in terms of fossil fuel reduction uh, through significantly, but during the pandemic. But again, we are back on track of like a consumption level, which is slightly higher. Just talking about the city's climate action planning, which is the EV targets. The annual sales just have reached at least to reach is 14,000 electric vehicle sales to reach that goal, and currently we are close to 800. So we are still slightly on track to reach that goal. Just talking about how there's a lack of level 2 charging or EV infrastructure in Eugene. We do have significantly a lot of charging stations, so we're hoping that uh, these level 2 charging stations can be put in places such as where people go grocery shopping or visit parks or visit their doctor for an appointment, and can hopefully leave their cars plugged in to charge for some amount of time. But you can so we're kind of working towards helping the community to get access to these charging infrastructure, but also encouraging the city to invest more with the funding coming through the federal legislature. Uh, but you can also see that West Eugene just especially lacks good charging locations in general, again, because of the inequity which we see. Another last slide, just focusing on the level 3 charging stations, which ideally takes 15 to 30 minutes to charge, and it's ideal for traveling. We again need to build this more out because along the travel corridors such as I-5 or even through 126, which is another travel corridor for us, and currently we just have one fast charger which is located in Eugene, but we need to focus more on getting access to these chargers and more infrastructures in place in the future. So just I want to conclude by saying that with this gas station moratorium, we hope that we don't have new existing gas stations and expand into these new existing gas stations because we already have plenty. We don't need more. Uh, Hopefully decrease uh, the red tape for EV charging stations. So if a gas station is abandoned, hope it can be replaced by an existing electric vehicle charging station. And other things to consider is to expand local subsidies for electric vehicle charging stations and require gas stations to install EV charging as what Germany is doing right now. and lastly, focus on designated or alternative fuel corridors, which we can see I-5 is already has one, which is in green, and also the coastal route, which has one. So hoping to get all the other routes to be also a designated alternative fuel corridor.
Thank you, Meet and Paige, for very informative presentation today. Outstanding job. We'll be taking questions. I know questions are going to be rolling in here. I'll start with the first question as we wait for questions to come in. And Meet, I believe this question would be best answered by you, but if you'd like to refer to Paige, that's obviously fine also. I want to go back to the first part of your presentation and ask a broad question. One of the things I obviously took from it is that medical incineration is extremely hazardous to people's health. So if we look at this issue on a global basis in terms of possibility, is incineration the best way to dispose of the waste, or is there an alternative we should be using?
Yeah, I think with incineration is quite frankly not the most efficient way if you're thinking of like we want to shift or not shift, we want to burn waste to create energy. That is a lot more inefficient. If we've seen that through in the long run that the whole world is actually moving more towards alternative fuel sources, but not using like incineration as a way of like burning to create energy or to create electricity. So I am not quite sure if there are other ways to, like for medical waste, how carefully that needs to be treated in terms of disposal. Uh, but I feel that there might be better ways in the coming future where we can handle that waste in a much more efficient manner, or at least have better technology in place if you're burning that, just better, stricter emission levels in terms of uh, as a byproduct of burning.
Let's go live to the Friendly House for a question from Jeff Strang.
Yeah, thank you, Meet and Paige. Very interesting presentation. And I'm just surprised that there's still incineration of waste, industrial, medical, all the waste, because I think landfilling it would allow it to be contained a lot more and not have all those toxins released very quickly into the atmosphere. But I am also wondering, do you do any work with preventing wildfires, which also significantly affect the air quality?
So Beyond Toxics focuses on air quality from multiple levels. Our work recently, a project we just finished up was in Southern Oregon, in Jackson County, in two small towns, Phoenix and Talent, between Medford and Ashland. And this work was with our partners down in Unite, Oregon at the Rogue Valley chapter. And this was more at the community level. After the Alameda fire happened in 2020, there was a wide amount of the community was not prepared, nor were local governments or just community members in general for that wildfire to happen. And so one of our projects that we worked on was twofold. In first, trying to prepare the community and provide resilience, but then also bringing community knowledge around particulate matter and things such as that. So for particulate matter, it's a large issue that's concerning with a lot of Oregon, specifically within the Southern Oregon area of Jackson County. This community is faced by a higher pollution burden of PM 2.5. And so what we have done is provided the community with purple air monitors, which are these low cost, but still really good technology and high quality air monitors that are used for community members to be able to have real-time data and monitoring the air quality indoor and outdoor of their homes. And so what this study was looking at testing the air quality over a 2-month period to look at air quality indoors versus outdoors. A lot of the time, people say it's better to be indoors during a wildfire, but from some of the studies we have found, It's not always better to be indoors just because some people's homes, maybe trapping air from outside will be coming in and won't have as good ventilation, especially in older homes that weren't as built with as good ventilation. So we were doing that research to try to look at how to better help the community in hopefully providing them with first these air quality monitors, but then the data that we were able to get from this pilot project, maybe this could translate to local officials or at the state level to provide and advocate for better air filtration in homes, whether that's through air purifiers or something along those lines for these people who may not be able to afford them. So that's a project we did recently around wildfire.
Sounds good. Thank you. Dakota, get ready at the mic at the friendly house. But first, let's go to Joyce in our Zoom community.
I have a question about the big incinerator at Comanta Marion, but the burning question for me, if there's time later, I'll bring that up. But the burning question for me is, as a driver of an electric car, I still worry that we are creating a solution that is almost as bad as the original problem. All those lithium mines and the devastation of the area around the pools that are of waste that are accumulating at those, that's not an answer. So are we actually putting our energy into, is this keeping us from working on a more sustainable answer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I personally feel that, I mean, there's with consumerism on the rise, I mean, there and like taking people's choice away to like use public transport, or not public transport, but like personal transport or moving from A to B. Uh, I I think, yeah, there are like consequences of, like you said, lithium mining, which is largely a huge environmental justice issue, and then people think that it's a much more cleaner alternative. But but what I feel that according to what the current available technology which we have so far is what is what is moving us in the direction of this is what it is so far. And if we have better technology maybe later on, which kind of moves us away from using moving us away from the lithium nitrate batteries to use in EV production, uh, I think that would be a way to at least be I don't know, a kind of an alternative. But I may not be able to answer your question completely because I'm not an expert in that space and area.
Well, I don't want to drag
Maybe
this out, but I just wonder if maybe if we put more energy toward hydrogen and solar, we could try and resolve the problem.
yeah, that I agree with. I think hydrogen is another whole. I think we've been working currently on hydrogen, and I'll let Paige speak about that. But I think with solar, not every community wants to like invest in solar, because I think just in Oregon that we don't have plenty of sunshine compared to other states. People are slightly more, uh, I would say, not laid back, but maybe hell bent on like moving to solar, because we have a huge amount of hydroelectric power, which is much more cleaner. Uh, and at least in Eugene, 90% of that power actually comes from hydroelectricity. So people still feel that they are not. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Let's go to Dakota at the friendly house.
This is a dim phone here. I can see myself barely. You can hear me? Cool. Good morning, Meet and Paige. I have a question for both of you, and then I have two questions for Meet. So the question for the two of you guys is, at least specifically as far as Beyond Toxics goes. First of all, what is your strategy for mobilizing large amounts of people to I think most people understand that generally these fossil fuel dependent sources are very bad things, and that whether or not we like to, many of us took cars to get here, et cetera, we are dependent on them in some ways. So it's a question of people might have in their heads already that, yeah, I know this is a bad thing, but I'm still going to go to the gas station and pay $20. How do you mobilize people to try and make that switch, especially when there's not a clear solution, like solar hasn't been invested in properly, or how do you what's your strategy for convincing people to care? to want to find a solution? That's the question for both of you guys.
Yeah, I can start out. So I think, I'm a community organizer, so mobilizing people is always difficult in various ways, just because people have their own lives. They're doing already all these other things. But I think one of the important things, and like in my work and how I try to think of it, is it's really important to not just show people the facts of what, like, I think people know that, we need to transition. Electrification is like the way to go, or renewable energy is the way to go. But looking beyond that, I think always touching on really personal stories is how I've always tried to mobilize folks and talk about the personal narrative. It has always been really key, and how I've been able to work with community more, especially within the being an environmental justice organization. That has always been really key and important to our work, is highlighting the communities who have been impacted, and making that to the forefront sometimes more than just facts and figures and things such as that. So please feel free to add on to anything though.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add on to the larger aspect of, like, we also work on the policy level. So I also feel like that's another way to, like, mobilize people to like, get them to participate if there's a certain policy which will benefit them and which will trickle down in terms of co-benefits and benefits to the community. I think that's another huge thing, like, to get people to come and testify, or to come and support, and come and show up. I think, like Paige said, that is one part of the issue, but I think the larger policy part of it, to kind of address clean transportation or an alternative transportation as a way of giving access to people, or even personal mobility as an access to people. I think that is a huge thing to kind of focus on, because I think that kind of ultimately benefits everybody, at least from the equitable standpoint.
Okay, and Dakota, go ahead with your other question.
Yes. And for me, a macro question and a micro question. Micro question is about the medical waste that you said on one of the slides for the I forget the name factory, but it was saying, are you saying that the input to the factory wouldn't be decreased? The hospitals would still have places to send their waste if the factory was gotten rid of. And if the solution isn't just burying it, unless it is, how would that not slow it down if they didn't have the place to go burn it, irrespective of whether or not that's a good thing to do? And I can do it one at a time, or I can say both of them if you prefer.
I'll answer this one first, and then you can go ahead. So the focus of this bill is kind of really easy in terms of, so at the EPA, at the larger federal level, when you're burning, or when you're termed as a medical waste incinerator, you're under strict regulations, which, as a municipal incinerator, which it's Covanta, they are not regulated under the strict EPA levels, which require you to have stricter emissions. So we're not asking them to reduce their waste, but if they're burning like 17,000 tons worth of equivalent waste, they would come under EPA's regulation of, oh, you would be termed as a medical waste incinerator. So that's what we want, because they have stricter technology. Like, if you're burning something, they have ways to lower the emissions, ways to maybe combat some of the dioxins which may be emitted into the air. We cannot completely eliminate it, but to get them to lower the amount of how much they are polluting through better technology, and through more inspections, and through more strict rules and regulations, which is already there at the federal level. That's what we are trying to do. We want DEQ, the Department of Environment Quality, to get that authority to regulate them as a federally recognized medical waste incinerator. So it's not taking away, not asking them to not burn, but if they're burning, they should be do it in a way which everybody else is doing it, because they're doing it without any sort of oversee under the weaker rules and regulations.
And that would still, as a minor challenge, that would still it would still go up in the air, though, even if it was federally, because they could just say on paper, well, we're doing it the right way, but we're still doing it. Do you know what I'm saying? And like, if the technology is just a matter, like, if the alternative is what other people do is just bury it, we may need to keep searching, I suppose, for what to do instead. You have local you have local, and then you have national and global, and etc. And ultimately, justice is love, right? So if environmental justice is about trying to make sure we're all good on the same planet, you have to deal with it ultimately on a global level, because that's what's going to affect local communities. So my question to you guys, or to, I guess, I said to Meet, but the question is, would it be better? What prevents something like a local project such as this becoming futile if everybody else it isn't ultimately a global project as far as reducing emissions? Because even if people, like we are, there is an economy there as far as what gas cars or this is the question. This is really the original. Is it's finite. So the fossil fuels are finite. Eventually, we'll have to move to electric vehicles anyway. But as Ms. Joyce correctly mentioned, even that comes with its own issues. Understood. So how do you expect on a global scale this sort of change to happen?
I feel that to like go against Covanta is a huge uphill battle, because when you're dealing with corporations anywhere, you're dealing with money and lobbying lobbyists who basically who are paid to like middle and fiddle with the legislation and to slow down the process of making the change which we want to bring, and ultimately bring to the local level. So I'm going to talk more on the local perspective because that's what we do. But I do see the fact that it affects on the global level as well. Coming from a developing country, I know that it affects the larger parts of my country where I'm from, India, and there's just not technology in alternate technology or even other opportunities which the country has, and they're not on par with the developed countries. So that's one thing. I don't remember the last half of your question, but maybe if Paige, you want to answer something.
Yeah, I mean, I can just add on and say that we work at such a like more micro scale level, so it's hard to think about like what can we do globally. But again, we can see that, I mean, there was just COP recently happened earlier this year, and within that, there are, I think, just having more of these community leaders in the conversation who can talk at what's happening actually to the community members at the local level is already a key piece there. And we began to see that at least with like the indigenous people in the global South, they were starting to be more represented when they talked about like climate reparations and loss and damage. So having those conversations even take place in the first place, I think, are an important starting point. But again, like it's not the end result. There obviously needs to be policies in place and actions in place to help the global South or just even communities that are burdened here within the United States. So I think it's really frustrating to see how long it takes to see global action, but it's still something that's needed. So I don't know if we fully answered your question, but yeah.
Let's go to our Zoom audience and Helen with a question.
Well, my question got answered, so I'm going to pass it over to Al.
Okay.
Yeah. My dad had a gas station in 1953, and it was better than the modern gas stations in three ways. And if you could get after the gas stations to go back in three ways, you would make the gas stations much better for the health of the communities. Number one, require them to have free air at the gas pumps that they could put in the car while you're getting your fuel refilled, so you stop wasting all the gas from people driving around on semi-inflated tires. Number two, require them to have a repair facility to keep the car in operating shape so that the thousands of pounds of carbon investment in building that car doesn't go to hell in 3 years. And three, prohibit them from selling junk food, which is killing the community. We've got the epidemic of obesity that has gone up as gas stations have taken out their repair facilities and put in a whole Disneyland of junk food. Okay. Do those three things and you'll make these gas stations good community members.
Al coming in strong with some gas station reform. I think there's a reading in your future on that, Al. I'm not sure if there was a question there, but Meet or Paige, do you have any comments on that?
No, I agree on specifically like overinflated or underinflated tires, like especially like a lot of people uh, I mean, don't know the basics of maintenance, which I don't blame them. I mean, sometimes you're in a rush, you don't get the time to do that. So yeah, if everybody, inflated their tires at what the tire manufacturers kind of uh, recommend, I mean, you have better fuel economy, which you're not again less trip to gas like equates to less trips to gas station. And I also agree on like the whole aspect of like maintaining vehicles at service stations. I think there's a huge, at least from my perspective, there are only few car manufacturers who focus more on reliability versus versus just on reliability for that matter. Like your vehicle, if your vehicle keeps breaking down, you're eventually going to scrap it or junk it, and that's going to just again create a whole cycle of um, uh, making new vehicles and then scrapping those old ones, and again make the resources being used to manufacture a new one. Uh, similarly to e-waste, electronic e-waste has planned obsolescence. So that's my take on that.
Let's go live to the friendly house and take a question from Dell.
Yeah, my point is that I think your organization should be politicking to the legislators to dump the lithium idea and go with hydrogen. There's an endless amount of water, which is a source of hydrogen, and an endless amount of solar energy. So hydrogen is a never-ending solution to the power situation. As long as we have sunlight and we have water, we'll have hydrogen fuel. I think you should be politicking on that. Dump the lithium idea.
Okay, any thoughts on that from the two of you?
Yeah, I can take this one, Meet. Beyond Toxics fully hasn't taken a stance on hydrogen. I know the federal government recently is looking at releasing funding to the state of Oregon for some hydrogen hubs. And there recently with our local gas utility, there has been a pilot project they were trying to do to use a mix of green hydrogen, but it was only about 5% hydrogen with fossil fuel blended into it to go into homes within the West Eugene community. And we oppose this, just citing EJ concerns and also recognizing that we didn't think it was the most not energy efficient, but most cost effective way when electrification is a cheaper option. And so we take a stance on hydrogen not being used in residential, though we haven't looked at anything further out of more energy intensive, looking at commercial or industrial, and that's something that we continue to look into. But Beyond Toxics still would like to look more and think about the EJ concerns that can be cited from hydrogen. So we're not fully there, but yeah, Meet, please feel free to add.
No, I would just say that what Del was saying. I mean, we don't have again not having a stance on batteries as well. We don't encourage that. I mean, I think we mostly focus more on public transit and public utility, public transport as a way of mobility, access to that, or even having a bike infrastructure for bike and pedestrians both. So walkable cities is also what we look at because we work with I forgot her name, a DLCD. We have worked closely with them to kind of learn more about how walkable neighborhoods or there's another program by DLCD which is climate friendly, equitable climate friendly. Paige, could you correct me for that?
Yeah, I can just add on and say that the equitable climate friendly solutions rulemaking process that they have, we've worked closely with them. We also, though, want to recognize the issues with rural communities and having access to transportation and how that may be equity issue there. So we're trying to think of it in multiple factors of how public transportation may not always be an option for everyone.
Okay, let's go to our Zoom community for a question from Ranga.
Yeah, first I have a comment on the hydrogen. From what I have read about, it seems that hydrogen as of today is not a very efficient way to produce power. On the other hand, its use in industrial production like steel, cement, and some other chemicals, etc. That's probably the most useful thing as of today. And perhaps for transportation, but still there needs to be more developments for that. Now, my question is about the gas station toxic emissions. Now, can't we have sort of requirement that the gas stations must have monitors monitoring the toxic gas emissions and also publicly display it so that people come to know what is the level of toxic emission around those places? Is that a feasible thing, or is it a more difficult thing, or is it something which can be done through laws?
Yeah, to answer that, we are working with, it's also known as, it's a really new rulemaking we are doing. It's called gasoline dispensing facility emissions rulemaking. That heavily focuses on when you Oregon has slightly more weaker standards of gas emissions regulation versus California, which has slightly more stricter ones, where in terms of fuel vapor recovery systems. So usually our cars do have onboard fuel recovery systems, which it doesn't allow the gas vapors to escape. But also on the gas dispensing side, we also have another vapor recovery system which captures the gas vapors which usually get emitted, and that's kind of put back into the underground storage tank. So that is one of the ways California is already leading ahead and doing that everywhere. They have all the gas stations have to be equipped with that. So Oregon is actually looking at that as a way to lower the gas station emissions in that manner. So again, that largely touches upon reducing it touches upon reducing the emissions, but also the public health or the public risk factor which goes under that.
No, I was wondering why can't we monitor actually the surrounding near the gas stations, what sort of emissions are there, and then you should be able to display it publicly so that you can put a pressure whenever there is some additional more than allowed toxic gas is there, then people will be able to take up this issue. So can there be a requirement that there should be monitoring, real-time monitoring of the emission?
I think that there can be real-time monitoring, but I think it's a really expensive process. Gas station, just like it depends on how much funding the Department of Environmental Quality has on hand to do that or to deploy those air monitors, and you have to do that for every gas station. So you multiply that with how many gas stations are there within the rural counties and even in cities. So it would be an expensive process for sure, but that is something which I would say we could push at the Department of Environmental Quality subcommittees to kind of think about air monitoring, because they're already doing that on a larger scale, but with particulate matter, not with gas station emissions or the benzene which is emitted from gas vapors.
We need more technological development in order to make these large scale cheaper and things like that. Once it's done, the costs really come down if we address the problem.
Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up our Q&A with a question from the Friendly House.
Topic, which is plasma gasification and your feeling on the ecosystem of syngas. I don't want to put more into that. Just a little perspective, because I heard about your concerns about incineration and many very valid reasons, and I was exposed to some research working in a hackerspace with someone exploring high temperature plasma gasification of biological materials and not e-waste or anything terrifying, and it sounded exciting.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Gasification is high temperature incineration using arc systems, and the intent is to create fuel. So syngas is the default. I'm I believe it burns about as cleanly as biodiesel, but yeah, it's a big area of research, and I don't think it's implementable because it's not scalable. But I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about the basic concept of, yeah, instead we're going to take all this, for example, plastic, which is largely carbon. You can incinerate that at such a temperature that it does not produce molecules that end up being errant. They simply produce gas.
Yeah, I'm not quite aware of that process, but I mean, just thinking about it, I assume that if you're burning at a higher temperature, you're pretty much going to be using a lot more energy to do that. And I don't know if the Covanta as a waste incinerator would think it's feasible for them, because they always look things from profit standpoint. So how will they make money and not lose money doing that process? So they'll I think that would be a way for them to not implement that, because if it's something good for which is happening for the society, I think they tend to move towards, again, the profit side, the money side aspect of things. And
yeah, the sale point I had heard was that, first of all, the plasma will take much of the energy from the fuel. You're getting a much higher proportion of consumption, but then the waste product is actually saleable. That the synthetic gas is still long chain polymers that you can, well,
But Meet and Paige, thank you so much for a very informative presentation and just a spirited question and answer session as well. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.